My name is Nigel Wright. I'm a mediator and arbitrator with Miles Mediation and Arbitration based in Atlanta. I'm actually joined by Rachel Gervin. Rachel is, in some ways, she's a serial GC. She is currently doing two GC roles, one of which is a very exciting software company, which she'll probably be able to announce later on in the year. In addition to which, we have Sloane Perras. Sloane is the GC of Foss Maritime, and Sloane has roots in the East Coast, but is currently in the West Coast. But she has held a number of senior GC positions throughout the country, and we're very, very glad that she and Rachel have been able to join us. We're equally glad that Glover is going to be here. Evan is an in-house attorney, counsel with NCR, which really doesn't do credit to what he does and how he goes about his business. And we very much appreciate all three of you joining us. So thank you. The topic today really is, what do GCs, what do general counsel or in-house lawyers want from their external lawyers? And this sounds like, this is the holy grail for external lawyers. How do you actually get retained? And of course, I'm sure that everybody will be listening very, very carefully to what everyone says today. And of course, opinions differ, and there's so much that goes into it. But I thought I would start by asking Rachel, just what are your top tips for external lawyers who are looking to be engaged by a company?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, Nigel. I'm happy to be a part of this with my good friends and colleagues and very accomplished fellow Atlanta lawyers. Sloane, I still consider you an Atlanta lawyer. This is an exciting topic, and I think my answer is probably not one that everyone loves to hear, but it's really relationship, and it's something, Nigel, that you and I have talked about in the past. But the lawyers that I have hired are, smart and experts in their field and well-regarded, but they've also spent time developing relationship through, for example, inviting me to speak on panels with them, or sending me topics that are relevant to what I need to know about litigation trends, or something in the technology industry, and helping me do my job in a way that makes everything easier for me. And so those are the people that I look to when I actually do have litigation arise, or I have an issue that requires outside counsel. Those relationships are super important and continue to be so.
Thank you. Sloane, I'm sure you have some thoughts.
I do, and I will echo everything Rachel said from the beginning about my co-panelists. I've missed you guys greatly. Onto relationships, but I'll take it a step further. Quite often I find myself, especially now that I'm in a maritime company and I'm not a maritime lawyer by pure background, I'm often looking for lawyers that I don't have relationships with, because these are new areas of law that I'm touching on. And so when I don't have a relationship with a lawyer that I can rely on, and that is my first go-to, what I'm looking for is a lawyer or a law firm that is going to be consistent with what I believe, consistent with how I want to see law practiced. I want to be managed well. I want someone who keeps to a budget. But I also want a law firm and lawyers who believe in diversity and inclusion. I don't want to see a homogenous team coming up and talking to me. I want to see a mix of men and women, of Caucasian and people of color, and that's really important to me. And I do tend to go to those organizations like NAMWolf, where I can find those diverse firms, but I also find them in big law, where I have partners who are particular sponsors of that. So for me, where I'm looking for somebody new that I don't have a relationship with, I'm looking for somebody who resonates with me. Thank you.
And Evan?
Sure. I agree. I was actually thinking when you asked the question, what is it? And it is relationships. That was going to be my answer. Rachel stole it. But why is it relationships? Because trust really matters. Because we look for attorneys who are practical, who are thoughtful, and who are innovative and diverse, as Sloane mentioned. But also, it's about trust, because we have bosses, we have leadership teams that we are responsible to answer to at our companies, whether that be, the CEO or the board or others. And we're putting our reputation on the line when we go out and say, this counsel is a good counsel. And so we're putting our trust in them. And it's an extension of us and our brand within the company. And so we want somebody who, embodies the kind of people that we are, and understands the risks and is practical. I'll also highlight that we'll probably get into, some innovation but also cost. I mean, most companies, especially in this environment, are looking to streamline costs as much as possible. So we oftentimes look at what is the most economical and efficient way that we can retain counsel. So I think that that's also a consideration for a lot of litigation. I mean, there are some litigation that are very important that you will pay the top dollar for, and you will pay based on reputation of the firm. There's also run-of-the-mill litigation where you need somebody who can just manage it efficiently and effectively and not expose you to a whole bunch of risk and cost. So I think it's relationships, but it's because we put our trust in those outside law firms to give us good advice, to give us, to tell us the blind spots, to tell us, what the options are, what the likelihood of the outcomes, because every lawyer will say, oh my gosh, if you sign up for this term in a contract, or if you do this path, you could end up paying, and they go through the litany of horrors. And you have to say, stop. But what is the likelihood of that? Because we're all managing a lot of risk for companies. And so we want somebody who's practical as well.
Evan, thanks for that. Probably not everyone listening knows, but I spent quite a bit of time in-house, and I spent time both in the GC's office and also managing global lines for a large international specialty company. And in that role, I came across a tremendous amount of lawyers. Primarily, they were lawyers that worked for the team, but I did get to know quite a lot of them, and I did, of course, have views about what I liked and what I didn't like. So apologies to the panelists. I'm actually going to throw my 2 cents in as well, and pick up on what Evan said, which really comes down to the issue of trust. When we were hiring lawyers, I always used to turn around to the claims team and say, look, do you trust this lawyer to have your back? And what I mean by that is not, are they going to cover up for you if it all goes horribly wrong? What I mean by that is, are they trustworthy, and are they going to do the right thing? Are they going to give you the bad facts that you need to know? Are they going to give you solid advice? And are they going to tell you clearly and honestly whether they're able to do what it is you want to achieve? So for me, trust was always absolutely central. So Evan, I really appreciate you picking up on that. Rachel, got anything? Have you had any experiences where somebody has shown great trust or maybe displayed a lack of trust?
Well, so I think both the points that Sloane and Evan made are super important. The trust, and as it specifically relates to the cost, and to Sloane's point, trust as it specifically relates to what a new firm might be representing in a pitch that then is going to follow up and be your team. So on the diversity and inclusion issue. But for me, I think specifically to the point everyone was making, these relationships that I develop with people do allow them to get to know me, my constraints as an in-house lawyer, my budget constraints, my timing constraints, and I trust that they incorporate that into their representation of my company. And it's also, sometimes it's a greater degree of trust than others, just due to the fact that, as in-house lawyers, as you well know, Nigel, we're constantly busy and pulled in a bunch of different directions. And litigation, where each individual litigation is sometimes just a small part of what we need to focus on. So sometimes we do have to trust that when they say, this draft is going to be ready for you to review on this day at this time, that's going to happen. And they know how important that is to us because they've taken the time to get to know us. And, we do have to put a lot of trust in their expertise sometimes. We don't always have the time to go back and trust but verify. We try to always, know everything we need to know about everything. But a lot of times we have to turn to outside counsel just merely out of the fact that we don't have time to take it on ourselves. Yeah. And that's where the trust relationships become so important.
So Sloane, when you're retaining a lawyer in an area that you maybe haven't had opportunity to work with them before, and you're trying to determine exactly who you should use and why you use them. The question I wanted to know was, do you look for an individual or do you look for firm? And if so, why? Whichever answer.
So there are what we call bet the company litigation, where you have to look at the firm as well as the lawyer, especially when your board may be at risk. In that case, the firm is as important as the lawyer. And then also there are some particular specialized areas. IP is an area where you want to look at the firm because the firm has a reputation, as an example, of being able to deal with patent trolls, or the firm has a reputation in the disabilities area of being able to deal with access trolls. In those cases, you do need the firm's reputation in addition to the lawyer. But my preference, outside of those small exceptions, is always to hire the lawyer. And even when I don't know who to reach out to, I start with my referral network. I reach out to Rachel or Evan or someone else who I know has expertise in the area that I don't, and I ask them, who would they use? Who would they recommend? And so that relationship element that we all talked about still comes into play, even when we're reaching out as much not blindly as possible.
Evan, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the question about sort of trust and an example of that. I think one easy example is oftentimes when we retain outside counsel, we ask for a budget. And it may be a budget for litigation, it may be a budget for a certain amount of time. And in the prior role, I was managing about 25, to Sloane's point, 25 patent troll cases around the U.S. And I asked all of my law firms for a budget, both for the current month, a projection for the next month, and kind of a guesstimate for the following month. So basically a 3-month rolling forecast. And what I found that, and so basically based on that budget, I took that and made representations to our finance arm of the company and said, here's how much I'm going to need. And they plan that out. And as you know, most companies really look at finances, especially for lawyers, because they think that we're expensive and they think outside counsel is expensive. So we have to justify that. And so we basically go and fight the fight on, here's the budget I need. Now, if I don't get a heads up that the budget is going to be blown by a law firm, I have a tendency to say, well, what's going on here? So if I get a bill that's much greater than what they budgeted, I have to go back to my finance people and justify it. And so what that does is that makes me question kind of the information that they're getting. And in those cases, one of the firms that I had, there was about 10 retained across the 25 cases. One of them blew the budget and didn't give me any heads up until I got the bill. Now I rejected the bill, and we had a real good conversation about that and how important it was. But I think that did not build trust in me in that law firm. But then to your other question about whether or not you hire lawyers or law firms, I think it's a mixed bag. I think you hire for particular expertise, like Sloane mentioned. You might hire one individual. But you may also hire a firm if you need a team of lawyers with cross specialty. So, for example, I think when you're doing an M&A deal, you obviously look at the firm because you're going to need, for example, lots of different specialties. You're going to need somebody to review real estate contracts. You're going to need, somebody with lots of different domain expertise. And so you're not just hiring the partner who's managing the M&A deal, who's negotiating the top line of it, but you need a whole group of folks who can review employment contracts and capitalization structures. And SEC rules if it's a public company deal. And so in those contexts, you're obviously hiring a law firm. But in other contexts where you may just be wanting a particular piece of information, what is the law in this area on this, or we're thinking about launching this product, I need a real discrete piece of information. I think that's a real good opportunity to hire just a lawyer.
Thanks. And Rachel, just on that theme, what are your thoughts on retaining the lawyer that's done it before? Is it almost automatic because somebody has done a good job for you, they get the next case, or do you like to mix things up?
So it depends a bit on the case, to Evan's point, and also to what Sloane was mentioning earlier. If this is a bet the company case, my lawyer that's been doing great work for me on my patent troll cases might not be the right one. And that is in part because of something that in-house lawyers don't like to say very often, but it's CYA.
Yeah.
We can have our great firm that we absolutely love and trust and have had a great relationship with. But where it comes down to, this could sink us, or this could really have a significant impact on this year's, revenue numbers or what have you, not revenue, but obviously financial numbers, then you may have to go with the firm that your parent company or even your leadership has recommended and used for years, whether or not you think that's the right way to spend your litigation budget or your time or what have you. But even then, we know enough people that we're typically able to come up with the right firm for that particular situation, and it's worth it. The budgeting, as a general counsel, that was one of my most frustrating tasks ever. I felt like they were asking me to predict the unpredictable, and there are definitely ways to make it easier, but it's still frustrating. And and I think one of the things that you have to do when you go with a firm, because of their reputation, regardless of price, is go back to your budget analyst and say, listen, we had this come in, it wasn't anticipated, and we've had to go with, the biggest, baddest New York firm because we absolutely must win. Because to the point Evan's making, no one wants a surprise. And those bills, are going to be a surprise. You just know that. And they're going to be outside of the norm. But when I'm in a regular, normal situation, I'm still a people person. I still trust and believe in people. And one of the things that's really helpful to see at a firm is that they have a couple lawyers that have been in-house, that have spent some time in-house. And you're seeing that more and more now. You're seeing that trend, and you're also seeing where lawyers who were formerly at really big firms and got their start there have now gone on to the Midwest somewhere where it's more affordable to live, and they've started really great firms at normal people prices. And so that's also attractive to me, whether I actually know them or not. Some of those are folks I've met through NAMWOL, to the point Sloane made earlier. Some of them are just, you've been able to look up at the firm and see, oh, this person was at huge firm X in New York for years, and that's helpful and comforting.
Sloane, so how does somebody demonstrate that they are, let's take the counsel selection in two parts. There's the we like you, we trust you, you do our routine work, and then there's the we're betting the company type law firm, and we'll come to that in just a little while. But in terms of the former, when you're talking about relatively routine, it may be a specialist area because it's marine, might be a Jones Act issue that a lot of liability or employment lawyers may not have come across before. But something like that, where you may have a list of 4 or 5 marine lawyers who know that, how do you choose the particular lawyer for the particular case? How do they develop a relationship with you, given that if you're in-house, and I'm sure that the 3 of you will understand this, you're being bombarded every day with, can I take you out for lunch? Can I take you out for dinner? Can I talk to you, etc.?
I like to start with just a phone call before you get to take me to lunch or dinner. Get on the phone and see, as we're talking, is it comfortable? Are we connecting and with things that we have in common? Are we both talking about family? Are we both talking about sports? Are we both talking about, especially in Seattle, for me, the outdoors? Is there something that makes me feel comfortable with you, that makes me want to take the next step in the relationship? It's not completely dissimilar from dating, unfortunately. And the nice part is on the in-house counsel side, you're always the desired one. So you're looking for that rapport. And then the other piece is, once I do have counsel, I have the economies of scale from continuing to give them cases. Their budget should get tighter. Their budget should get lower. There should be less surprises because they know my work better. And so when I have a group of lawyers, we do try to balance out the cases so we don't put all our eggs in one basket. But we also try to be fair and be respectful of the relationship of trust that we have and feed them the work that they're expecting. It is a two-way street. We can't just take from them and expect that they're going to continue to give in return. And so it's important to remember you are in a relationship with your counsel, and that your counsel needs to be able to go back to their management and show the value that they're getting for the firm. And so I think that's an important element, especially with your everyday counsel that you're working with all the time.
And just on that theme, Rachel, can I just ask you, have you had lawyers that you have worked with through each of the firms or companies where you have been either GC or senior counsel and will continue to work with? Maybe you can talk a little bit about, if that is the case, why that is the case, and what they did compared with maybe lawyers that you have retained in the past that you would no longer retain.
So one of the things that Sloane said about the initial report is actually in part the answer to that question. The biggest turnoff for me is an attorney who assumes because I'm in-house, I don't know anything about whatever the subject area is. The funny thing about being an in-house lawyer is that you know a little tiny bit about everything. And so I don't necessarily consider myself an expert in oil and gas or marine or anything like that, but I do know enough because I do the work every day. And so I don't like to have, I like a lawyer, a law firm attorney to be an expert and to be competent. I know that's very important, but I don't want them to be condescending. And where that comes across in an initial meeting, it's a immediate turnoff for me, because I need them to respect that I know what I know about my company, and it's going to be just as important to whatever interaction we have as their expertise will be. I wouldn't have called them if I didn't need their expertise, but it doesn't mean that I know nothing. And so there's a little balance there that I think is hard for some attorneys to strike, and that's part of why I do kind of look for firms that have some people with in-house experience. I think if you have been on the in-house side, you understand and respect that in-house attorneys are still attorneys. I mean, I remember still when I first went in-house back in 2003, and there were people that said, "Oh, you don't practice anymore." And I was like, I'm still a lawyer. I still practice. I'm still admitted to the bar, all of those things. So that's an important thing. But the difference between people that I stick with that will continue to get work and people who I might not go back to, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of location. We may have hired someone who's a big name in a small town because we had something specific that required a local touch, and we may not be back in that area again. So it's nothing personal to that person. But people that I typically stick with long term are people who will continue, even after I start giving them a ton of business, will continue to, invite me to speak on panels or help me to get into a conference for a discount, understanding that my budget is really limited for that type of thing, or continue to send me books and articles on things that are important to me, or, highlight something for me where I was in a newspaper article that I didn't even know about. Those people continue to court me after they've already gotten the business, and they continue to maintain that contact and relationship. And it wasn't just something they were doing to win over our business. I will continue to send them work because I feel like they continue to earn it.
Thank you. Evan, maybe I can just turn to you for a moment. And one of the things that really struck me with what Rachel was saying was that people tend to forget that in-house counsel don't have magic budgets which enable them to fly around the world or the country doing whatever they want to do. Typically, those budgets are very, very tightly controlled. And as a result of which, if you actually want to speak at a conference or attend a conference, it can actually be cost prohibitive because it simply isn't in your budget. So my question is, to what extent do you feel that that is something that external lawyers should be supporting you, and to what extent do external lawyers go over the line and sometimes try to be too generous, which causes other issues?
I think in today's world, we can all speak on panels virtually, so perhaps not the need for travel. However, I do think, outside counsel should be absolutely mindful that while we don't have unlimited budgets, we do have a lot of access to capital. But at least at my company and many others that I've been at, in order to do something, you have to produce a business case. So you have to justify it. Even a new litigation comes in, there's a trip, a new tool or technology. You want to have a contract management system. You want to have a system that does e-discovery. All of those things have to fit into the business process. And so that means you have to write a business case. And so it's really challenging for me to say, I've got to fly across the country to go speak on an hour panel at perhaps a conference that I don't really that I'm only tangentially involved in. And it's hard to justify that business case when that money could be spent to send one of our sales reps to go close a deal that's revenue generating. And so I think about the business case, and I think so outside counsel should understand that we do have limited budgets, but I think they're all justified by business cases. And so know that when we go and have to spend money, whether it be outside counsel or on a tool or hiring an expert or a vendor or any of that stuff, that we're having to produce a business case and a business justification. And there are competing business cases throughout the company, whether that be opening up a new building, whether that be investing in a new product, whether that be taking on or paying down debt. There's a whole bunch of competing capital projects at a company. And so we fit into that. And now, while the law departments generally are relatively small and compared to an overall budget, but we have to sort of play by those rules. I mean, we're talking to the same finance people that everybody else is. So I think that outside counsel should be mindful of that. And I did want to highlight two other parts on sort of the selection and the way that I think through counsel. One is that I tried to set up my counsel almost like on an annual basis. So I'm kind of reevaluating them, obviously on a case-by-case basis, but really on an annual basis. I want basically an annual review. So I want once a year for them to come in and say, here's the cases we handled, here's the success, here's the overall things that we did for you, here's the way that we minimized cost, and here's our diverse perspective, here's kind of how we're keeping modern in the way that we go to market here, the new practice areas we're investing in, basically an annual business review of our business. And that's what I've seen that a lot of my colleagues on the business side do that. So I try to do that with my law firm vendors. And secondly, a lot of times we are retaining counsel and we are trying to get insurance coverage. And probably in Sloane's case and in other cases, we're getting insurance coverage. So one of the other critical things that I tell outside counsel is make sure that you're on those insurance rosters. Because if I'm handing over a case to insurance counsel and they have a pre-approved list, and I could either advocate for you to get put on that list, which is a challenge, or I could go with somebody who's already on that list. That goes into the calculus of how we retain counsel. So I encourage law firms to get on those pre-approved lists, because if we go to insurance coverage, that's an easier path for me to pick counsel based on them being pre-approved, because insurance is paying at the end of the day.
That's a great point. And I just want to switch gears here very quickly and talk about diversity, because Sloane mentioned it as something that was important, and it has become increasingly more important, primarily within the corporate world, but the legal profession has now taken note. And I actually attended the Atlanta Legal Aid Society annual fundraising the other day. And one of the speakers spoke very eloquently about the need for diversity to be reflected in who you're presenting and why you're presenting them. So in other words, not just having diversity for the sake of diversity, but actually supporting diversity and making sure that your team had the requisite skills and weren't just being put there for a tick box environment. Rachel, I was going to ask you whether you wouldn't mind just very quickly talking about that, and then I'll move on to Sloane and Evan.
So I think it's a really great question. I started practicing in 1997. I was the first Black woman lawyer at my law firm in Washington, D.C. at the time. It was a 100-person firm, nationally much larger. I was shocked to learn that I was the first anything back then. The legal profession has a long way to go. And in the over 20 years that I've been practicing, it hasn't made a ton of progress. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but the bottom line is it's a very simple thing. Law firms have the higher numbers. They hire diverse attorneys and women. But I think where things fall apart is that they're not training and giving them the same opportunities that other attorneys might have. And a lot of that is personal preference. You are attracted to someone who you believe is like you. And so when the time comes up to give someone a great case, you're likely to reach out for that person that you already like and think is like you. The reality is fixing this diversity issue takes people going well beyond what they're comfortable with. And sometimes you have to get a little uncomfortable to figure out what needs to be done. Law firms have an obligation to train lawyers. They're the best training ground a lawyer can have. A well-trained lawyer, given the same opportunities as anyone else, I mean, obviously they earn their way in on their own merit. So it's a matter of making sure that diverse attorneys are given the same opportunities and same experiences from the time they walk through the door. And as in-house counsel, we can be enforcing that, and we can also serve as places for diverse attorneys to come do, internships and take advantage of opportunities to get other exposure to clients. And so there's many simple, low-hanging fruit type things that can happen on the diversity issue in the law. We just have to be ready to do it and be committed to it.
Rachel, thank you. Sloane, you actually raised that in your opening, and just if I can just turn to you, can you explain why it is so important for companies that their lawyers promote diversity and not just say that they promote diversity?
I think that studies are pretty clear in showing that when you have boards, when you have executive teams, when you have management teams that are diverse in thought, the company performs better. And at the bottom line, each of us, we are not just lawyers for our company, we are business executives for our company, all three of us, and we are worried about the company's bottom line, and we want the company to perform well. And if the studies show that the company's going to perform better with diversity in its levels of leadership, then to me, the company is going to perform better and get better results from law firms that are diverse. And I want to add on to something that Rachel said. It's not enough to just show that you're doing diversity. For me, you have to have a diverse team of lawyers as my team of lawyers. And I expect them to be doing substantive work, and I'm willing to spend my time talking to younger lawyers and helping them grow and develop in order to do my part, since I expect the law firms to take the heavy lifting there.
Evan, do you think that diversity is a generational problem, or do you think it's a little bit more system-wide?
That's a great question. The way I think about it is, the world is changing so quickly. Globalization, movement of people, movement of ideas, that when I look at things, I look for, to Sloane's part about diversity of people, experiences, opinions. I'll tell you that even at my company, we have a Black Professionals Forum. I sit on their advisory board. I'm a member of our gay and lesbian affinity group. I identify as gay. So I'm really involved in our affinity groups and promoting diversity within our own company. And so it's important to me, as Sloane mentioned, for a whole host of reasons, but also personally, that's something that I want to promote at my company, a diversity of people, a diversity of experience, a diversity of opinions. And I think that you're starting to see a real reckoning and a real change and a real awareness of it, that it's not just diversity, but it's also, to Sloane's point, inclusion. Diversity is being asked to the party, being asked to the team, inclusion is being asked to dance, it's being involved. And so when I look at outside counsel, and I challenge our own leadership team at NCR on these things, our law leadership team at NCR, so that the vice presidents that report up to our general counsel, every week we talk about diversity. It's a standing agenda item on what we're doing to promote diversity internally, externally with our vendors. But we also look at other ways that we can embrace diversity. So, for example, in our volunteer work or pro bono work, are there opportunities for us to support minority organizations as we do pro bono or volunteer work? So I am taking on a volunteer case that will benefit a minority organization. So I look at it a lot holistically, as you may not be able to change how many, like a metric that you have on your in-house department. You may not be able to overnight hire a bunch of people who are diverse, but I think there are things where you can move the needle, you can mentor folks. But when we look at law firms, I oftentimes ask, what is your stance on diversity? I ask, how do you ensure people are being heard? How do you make it safe for people with a diverse opinion to speak? How do you give feedback and share credit across a team? Is there a career path for people who are diverse? How do you empower them to network or get visibility? It's much more beyond just the numbers. It's really having that probing conversation, talking maybe about implicit bias. Do you all do implicit bias training? What is your view on that? At NCR, we all had to take implicit bias training recently with a test where we had to pass the test. It was mandatory, and there's a test that you have to take to recognize that. And it was tough. I mean, it was only 6 questions, but it really makes you think, and that's the point of it. So I think just the conversation, the people getting aware, I think you're going to start seeing more and more change. And so I think that it will get better, but I think it also requires a commitment from those of us, both on internal counsel, outside counsel, folks who are judges or people who are in the legal aid community or mediators. I think or academics. I think it's incumbent on all of us who are leaders in our community to really advocate for both diversity and inclusion.
Thanks, Evan. I thought it was a great answer. And you touched on a couple of points which really struck home with me, which and primarily they center around implicit bias. Because when I kind of think back on my career, and I'm probably a little bit older than people think I am, I never really thought about whether I was being biased or not. I just went on and I did my work. And I had a very fortunate career. I traveled all over the world at a very young age. And that gave me a particular perspective, and it gave me, in my view, a broader experience and an exposure to different cultures than a lot of people my age still have had. But one of the things that I didn't really think about until relatively recently was my own internal biases. And at Miles, Marcy Dixon, who is the marketing director, wrote an excellent article really addressing a whole bunch of issues around diversity, and in particular, the need to have uncomfortable conversations. And when I kind of look back, even from my own in-house time, yes, we had diversity awareness and we had diversity panels, and I would turn up, I would support them, I would tell my team it was important to support them. But when I actually looked to which lawyers I retained and why I retained them, I'm not sure that I was really following through. I thought that I was being very diverse. I thought that I was being very supportive because I thought I was doing all the right things. But what I wasn't doing was actually promoting it in a positive way by actually retaining lawyers. And so that was a real awakening for me. And my belief, rightly or wrongly, is that companies are not going to put up with people saying, I'm diverse, I have a diversity program within my law firm. They're actually going to want to see some activities to support that. And Sloane, to what extent do you find that is that reflected in your company, and do you think that is the next wave in terms of inclusion?
I think that there's a difference between publicly traded companies and privately held companies, and not all privately held companies, but my company is a government contractor, so we are obligated to have an affirmative action program. We're obligated to care about it. But it wasn't until this year that we had a new finance manager come on board and say, I want to see a diversity and inclusion committee. Hiring diverse people isn't enough. What Evan said is so true. You got to invite them to actually dance and not just bring them into the company. And so we've taken that additional step, and it's a baby step in comparison to what NCR has as an example. NCR is more of a gold standard for us to achieve over time. So I think as we have, especially millennials coming up into management positions, we are seeing more demands for that. And I personally love it. I think it's great that they're open to it and that they're pushing for it, and they're helping change the culture of companies. Sometimes I speak alone at the top, and it's hard to make the business case. And it's such an important topic that I keep, sometimes I feel like I ram my head against a wall. Foss is better, and part of it is because we're a government contractor and there are those expectations, and part of it's because we have a new CEO who believes in it, and so that's going to cause a fundamental shift in our company culture. But I wanted to say, back to your comment around stepping over stepping back for a second. It's not, I too have found, although I speak very matter-of-factly and highly about diversity and inclusion, all of a sudden I look around and my counsel is very homogenous. And I think you have to be willing to have a really tough conversation with your outside counsel relationship partner to say, this group lacks diversity, and if you don't do it, if you don't help me change that, I'm going to pull some of this business back. And I've had to have that conversation. It was in Atlanta. It was with an Atlanta partner. And what makes me wedded to him and what makes me wedded to that relationship is the fact that he responded affirmatively. And he said, we're right. We've had some personnel changes. It has shifted. Let's look at a couple of new faces. And are you open to using attorneys from outside of Atlanta to help drive this? And I said, of course I am. I don't care where they're located if they know the law. And so I think in-house counsel being willing to have those tough conversations and be self-reflective is very important for the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion.
Evan, do you think that's a coming trend for corporate counsel to take a closer look at the promises made by external counsel?
Sure. And I think it goes back to my point where, I think best practice is to review on a regular basis kind of your business relationship with a firm, whether that be a quarterly business review or an annual business review, where you really are taking that time to kind of not just be in the moment, but really look at things holistically. Okay, what progress are we making on these various metrics, whether they be diversity or cost or whatever, and really analyzing the business relationship and then giving tasks to Sloane's point, giving tasks to the law firm. Here is what, here's what I think you should work on. And part of the reason that all of this diversity is important, beyond the moral imperative and the thing that it's the right thing to do, companies have to be innovative in today's society. They have to be open to innovating. And the way you innovate is you're open to different ideas. You're open to taking risks. You're open to thinking outside the box. You're open to change. And so for a company who's maybe expanding globally, to go to Africa, you have to be able to be open to that market. You have to be understanding of that culture, of how those folks operate, to tailor a product to them. Similarly, litigators at a law firm who want to win more cases, if they're trying a case in a jurisdiction that has a particular demographic, you have to be able to speak to that kind of jury, because the jury may be diverse or have a different demographic. And so to increase your chances of success, either on the business side or on a litigation side, I think you have to be able to be open to change, thinking through things, being able to modify your stance and deliver a more tailored message. And so it's imperative from a moral standpoint that we do this, but it also has real business implications. And that the people who are open to diversity of thought and opinion, the people who are open to change, who are open to innovation, in my view, will be the successful leaders of tomorrow. It just sets them up for success compared to your competitors who may be resistant to that change.
Thank you, Evan. I think we're going to change tact a little bit and talk now about some of the issues that you raised earlier about cost management and in particular surprises. And for lawyers who are looking to be retained, we've gone through quite a few of the points that the panel thinks they should be looking at. But budget management is a big one. And a lot of it's to do with surprise, as Evan spoke about earlier. But a lot of it's also to do with a term which I kind of nebulously call value. And Sloane, I'm going to ask you, what is the difference between value and low cost? I know might sound like a simple question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
It's actually a really hard question. Low cost just means a low hourly rate. Value is the innovative lawyer who thinks outside the box and still manages to stay on budget. It's the lawyer who is able to come to you with recommendations, likelihoods of successes and failures. It's the lawyer who sees that we're working on this big case for 3 years and invites you to a conference to learn more about the topic, or on a webinar, or invites you to speak on it. I know Rachel had raised that point earlier. The value add is the extra mile that you go above what you do on your hourly rate to make sure your client has a relationship with you, that your client understands the matter, that your client has sufficient exposure in the community that might be a new topic or a new area of law for them, and that they get to meet other people. And sometimes value add is knowing that you're the wrong lawyer and recommending someone who's going to really knock it out of the park for your outside counsel, for your in-house lawyer, and bow out. Sometimes I'm always the most impressed with a lawyer who tells me they're not the right person for the job, but they've got a great person and they want me to have the most successful outcome.
Evan.
Yeah, value is a hard thing, but I think, one, it's incumbent on the law firms to justify the value. So it's a challenge to the law firms to think about how you can demonstrate the value. And maybe it's through implementing legal project management. So you're giving better dashboard or visibility, or you're taking some innovative tool and giving me some more information or analytics or something. Maybe it's some sort of technical or analytical view. Maybe it's by mixing the work in terms of insource and outsource. I mean, oftentimes law firms or litigators, they can go and hire a document review firm who's much less expensive, or use some other tool, or get up to speed in some other way. So maybe they can outsource legal work in some way. I don't expect law firms to get it right every time. And on the first case, but what I also think helps justify this value is that after a case is done, or after a certain motion is heard, or after a matter is resolved, that they go back and look and analyze what happened and do like a root cause analysis or a postmortem. Oftentimes at companies, we do that with a product launch, with a security incident, with a process that's been a long process. We oftentimes go back and say, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? We learned from it. Okay, we spent this cost, but we probably didn't, so we can take that cost out. We did this thing, and it saved us money, so we should always, default to that option. And so be analytical about what happened. And I see very little of that from law firms, where they're saying, doing a postmortem and being critical of themselves. At companies, we have to do this all the time. We have to kind of learn. We have to be critical. We have to take criticism. We have to then modify and pivot our course based on that, and kind of put together almost a business case, and then move forward. So I would challenge law firms to think about doing that. Is to say, here's what went right, here's what went wrong, here's what we're going to do next time, here's how we demonstrated value, here's how we didn't quite get it right, but here's how we're going to make it better. And that kind of openness to growth, that growth mindset, is tremendously powerful for me, because I'm probably willing to take a chance on you, knowing that you can learn lessons and modify course instead of taking the same course over and over again. So I would challenge firms to be real thoughtful about that stuff. And very few times do I hear a lawyer at a law firm say, here's what I did wrong and here's what I'm going to do right next time. They'll tell you every day what they did right, but they won't say, here's what I did wrong. And in fact, one of the questions that a lot of times we get pitched, and Sloane knows this, from very senior partners at law firms who want our business. And one of my favorite questions is, why should I not hire you? I want to make sure that you see your faults and your limitations. So why should I not hire you? Give me 3 reasons why I should not hire you. I don't ask the question of what's your weakness, because they all say I work too hard and I'm just too amazing. I don't want to hear that. I want them to be able to see that there's opportunity for improvement in every process. And so why are 3 reasons why I should not hire you, your firm? And if it's silence, that tells you something. Yeah. That they're not willing to change and be open to being innovative and thinking a little differently.
Evan, I really love that answer. When I was in-house, it gives me an opportunity to come out with one of my favorite lines when I was interviewing external counsel. I always used to ask them, tell me about the case you lost at trial. I didn't want to know about the case they won at trial, because they're not going to learn anything from that. And so it was amazing, because to your point, very, very few attorneys will actually turn around and say, oh yeah, I made this mistake, I made that mistake. But it's only through making mistakes that we learn. I mean, I have 3 children. I have seen it in action. And we have to learn to grow. We have to make mistakes in order to grow, rather. And so I always used to love asking that question, because I used to love watching the external lawyers squirm as they used to try to come out with turn some into a victory.
And because I threw the question out there, I'll answer it, because I think we should have that open dialogue. So for me, I tend to focus on the high tech, the software world, the mobile, the privacy world. So things that are very forward thinking. And so I'm constantly thinking about, what does this spectrum look like in 2 to 5 years, growth. And so that's where I excel. By contrast, if somebody were to say, Evan, you're going to be negotiating non-disclosure agreements, 100 of them every month, and that's going to be what you're doing, or the same type of agreement over and over, repetitive, I don't excel in that kind of atmosphere. And so if somebody said, we want you to basically do the run-of-the-mill agreements, basically the same agreement over and over and over again, and we want you to do that for the next couple of years, I'd say I'm not the right person. I like to think a little bit more. I'm more forward-thinking. I like to take some risk. I like to be in that sort of high-tech and innovative space, and that's where I want to play. And so if I were to get that question, I would answer it honestly, which is like, if you want me to pull the same lever for 5 years, I'm not your guy. If you want me to create the better mousetrap and advise a business on the risks of that better mousetrap, that's where I excel.
Wonderful. Sloane, do you have a question that you'd like to ask potential law firms?
It's so horrible. I retain lawyers and law firms across so many different areas. The questions don't remain the same. I do ask about their biggest failure as a lawyer, but it really depends on the rapport of the interview as to what I'm looking for. What I like to do is I like to set out my expectations, and then I ask them how they feel about it. And if I get a off-the-cuff answer that's not really meaningful, that tells me a lot about the lawyers and about the law firm. And so with me, I let them know things like, I'm an extremely direct communicator. You need to communicate directly with me. I don't want you to dance around the bush. I don't want to hear a bunch of, well, maybes and what ifs. I'm paying you to take a stand on issues, and I need you to talk to me about it. And if you're not comfortable or your firm doesn't operate that well, you're not a good fit for me. I am on a strict budget. If you don't understand the financials of a corporation and how corporations accrue and reserve for litigation and other matters, we need to have a quick conversation about that. And you need to tell me now that you're not used to that. And I will, if you're selected, I will give you a quick tutorial so that you understand what I need from you from a budget perspective. Guests like fish smell in 3 days, and so do budget surprises. I will go through a lot of my expectations, and I will expect substantive, tailored answers and not a sales pitch back in order to continue forward with me.
Thank you.
I want to jump in on one of Sloane's comments, which is she doesn't like a lot of just maybes. And one of my former general counsels said, if I ask a question and the law firm answers it, well, it's about a 50% chance, or it's a maybe. He said, I can flip a coin and I don't have to pay you to give me that answer. And so to Sloane's point, here are the 3 potential outcomes. Here's the likelihood. Here's the risk. Here's how they play out. A tailored answer rather than, well, it could be this or it could be that, because my former general counsel would say, I can flip a coin. I don't need to hire you. I can take my chances there. But I do think that, having those tailored, thinking about solving problems, the different outcomes and the likelihood of those, the upsides and downsides to each of those really helps frame it. And frankly, give me the choice. Give me the 3 outcomes. Give me the risks and the benefits to each of them, and tee it up for me to make that decision based on what I know about my company and my risk tolerance and where my company is. That's tremendously powerful. Don't give me, very little information to make an informed decision. I need to make an informed decision. So that's really important to me as well.
Again, great points. And when I was in the role that you and Sloane are currently, I was used to any lawyer that came up with a 50-50 or it depends, I'd say, why are we even retaining this law firm? I mean, they're actually adding zero value to the exercise. I also turned around to the claims teams and said, I don't mind if they're wrong, as long as the basis upon which they are wrong is reasonable. In other words, could a reasonable person have reached their opinion? If the answer is yes, and they turned out to be incorrect, even if it cost us a lot of money, it was a well thought out, well reasoned position that had been adopted. What used to drive me crazy was somebody giving me 15 cases, which, let's face it, none of us in-house ever have the time to read. So I don't know why you even send them. And then being told, well, it depends. I mean, that's really not helpful. Anyway, on that note, we are nearing the end. And so what I thought I would do is, in the last 5 minutes, just very quickly talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've had some really fun conversations with lawyers, which, and I'm going to ask Sloane and Evan to see whether they had similar experiences. But when I was in-house and managing external attorneys, one of my favorite lawyers, and I really do like this individual, was always late with his report. And I used to have to phone him up and chase him. And I probably, because I had a good relationship with him and I knew he was a really, really good lawyer, but he always used to say the same thing. Oh, I'm so sorry. I had a deposition for someone else. I had a motion for someone else. And all I kept hearing was, someone else's work is more important than my work. What horror stories have you had? And would you kindly share them with us?
I can tell you're not going to have many of those phone calls with me chasing you for the work. I simply don't have the time for that. And you're not managing my expectations, which is one of those discussion points that we talked about when I retained you, which is really critical for me because I answer to my CEO, my executive team, my parent company GC, my parent company board, my own board. There's just not, I don't have the time or the place for nightmare lawyer stories. And if you're becoming one for me, our relationship isn't going to continue. And I think the key element of that is, with me at least, and I hope with all lawyers, you're not going to be surprised when I let you go. You know, there needs to be communication back and forth. And you need to know that I'm dissatisfied with you before I reach the point of no return. So I'm sorry I don't have a really super good horror story. I like to think that my counsel is very, I retain counsel based on their ability to meet my expectations. And so I don't have to do a lot of chasing. I guess I have one active litigation matter where the case is so massive and complex that I do chase for a weekly report once in a while. But we've already changed counsel once because counsel was completely missing the ball. But on this one, the complexity and the real-time events that are happening every day is really what's driving the lateness versus the attorneys focused on something else. So I have to give them kudos to the job they're doing, just in case they listen.
So clearly it's just me, but Evan.
Yeah, I would encourage outside lawyers to know your audience and speak to your audience. And I'll give 3 examples of how that played out and kind of what to learn. So several years ago, we had a class action lawsuit, and we had hired a counsel in Atlanta, and there was a class action certification hearing. Our general counsel flew in, and our outside counsel knew, our general counsel was from California. She flew in, and our counsel was speaking with opposing counsel, and at the hearing actually sat next to opposing counsel because that person was most familiar with their outside counsel counterpart. They worked in the same geography. They knew each other. And my outside counsel said, she barely talked to me and I'm the client. And she immediately came back to the office and said, we're not going to hire that law firm again. In another case, I had a partner at a large law firm. I was speaking on a panel with this partner at a large law firm. and she asked me to make changes to the PowerPoint slides for the seminar. And I responded, that's not how this works. While at a law firm, you move up maybe by moving up on a hierarchy and a chain of command. That's not how you may be able to speak to everybody at the law firm that way, but you need to change your tone when you're speaking to outside counsel. And the third example is that a junior partner just this last year in an M&A deal asked me to go into the asset purchase agreement and mark my changes in yellow using track changes comments or something or other. And I simply responded back, no. And I responded from my mobile device, here are my comments. You weave them into the document. And I talked to the senior partner on that M&A deal and said, this is just unacceptable. While that junior partner may be talking to folks opposing counsel or the other party or people down the chain, this is the very instructions. When you're talking to the client, you need to say, I'll take feedback in whatever way and I will make it work behind the scenes. It's the same example that we have to do with our customers at NCR. We get a bunch of requirements and we have to kind of do all of the hard work to make it a great customer experience. And that's the burden on us to make it effortless to them. But we're doing lots of hard work behind the scenes to make it look effortless. So I would just encourage folks to know your audience and tailor how you speak to them. I have a very different attitude when I talk to somebody compared to the board of directors or somebody who at the board much more formal, less formal to a friend who I'm having a beer with at work. So know your audience.
Evan, thank you very much. And I'm going to end on that note, which I think is a great one to finish with. Know your audience and make it seamless as possible, because don't forget, in-house counsel has a tremendous amount of work that they have to do, and they need you to support them. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the panelists bearing with us to the end, and the audience, obviously, for listening through. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Bye, Sloane.
Thank you, Nigel. Bye, Evan.